attendees as a jab at the journalism. Before we start the program for the day, I would like to give a brief overview of what we do. The main goal at Jamlab is to strengthen innovation in African independent journalism and media, as well as grow the diversity of the continent's voices in the public space. At Jamlab, we believe that good ideas need to be known so that others can learn from them. And in the same breath, failed ideas also need to be known for the same reason. So how do we do this? We run 3 programs under the Jamlab umbrella. Of practice, we provide an opportunity to share experiences, knowledge, and learning. While the knowledge program through our magazine, we showcase innovations and innovators who share experiences of using new technologies and tools and provide access to research. On the business of the day, I'm really excited about today's webinar discussing engaged journalism, how online media bridges the gap between journalists and the audience they serve. Engaged journalism aims to close the gap between the newsroom and the audience by viewing journalism as a conversation and to varying degrees involving the audience in the reporting process. Today, I am joined by Juanita Williams, the managing editor for allafrica.com, the world's largest electronic distributor of African news. Based in their Cape Town office, William leads staff working on allafrica.com from Abuja, Monrovia, Harare, Nairobi, and Washington, D.C. While All Africa French, the French version, is updated by reporters and editors in a reporter, radio show producer, presenter, news editor, video news producer, media trainer, and board member at Africa's first community radio project, Bush Radio, Quote This Woman, Forum, IOL, and the Gresham Michelle Trust, and Zupi.com. Secondly, we have Fiona Nzingo, who is the membership and engagement manager at Global for network and engagement related activities with the membership of 130 members. Before GFMD, she worked with RNW Media Love Matters Africa Project, an interactive platform that provided sexual and reproductive health rights information to over 1.5 million young people across Africa. Thank you, ladies, for joining us today. We're excited to have you both, and we hope that you guys will share insights on what it is that you do. Throughout the conversation, I do encourage the attendees to ask questions in the Q&A box section, so it can be an interactive conversation. So we do encourage you guys to ask questions. Fiona, I'm going to start with you. How do you define community-centered journalism, and why is it important today?
Thank you, Lwazi. Well, before I start, I was requested to briefly mention something about the Global Forum for Media Development. The Global Forum for Media Development, GFMD, is the world's leading network of media development and journalism support organizations of up to, as Lwazi said, 130 plus members. So one way we've worked with journalism is by bringing insights, evidence, and a range of tools and resources about journalism support and media development, and guidance on how journalism is to build trust. community audience, reporting on problems that can be addressed, and also find these problems. So as for the importance, I would say that community-centered media is a key agent of participatory development. So having this approach really brings interest in the community together to be able to create a personal impact that can be recognized by governments, international development agencies, and civil society organizations alike. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Fiona. Juanita, this question is for you. All Africa aggregates and produces content from the African continent about all types of topics, ranging from politics, economics, culture, and so on. How do you create content that engages with the audience or encourages the audience to come back to your news sites and read your content?
I think the main thing with engaging with the audience is that to a certain extent, try not to see it as a separate entity from the media that is being created. So when we talk about community, we have to talk about like, so is that community's needs in terms of media coverage or in terms of having their stories told being met? And I think that's really important when it comes to engagement, and how we do it is we try, and particularly because a lot of our work is done remotely, we try to speak to the people that we are interviewing and the stories that are telling as much as possible to build the relationship, because I think that that's really important when it comes to engagement. But then I also want to go back to what Fiona said about, you know, what engagement is, and there's always been the push and pull between. I come from historically where we were told objectivity was important, and so engagement comes along and just blows all of that up. So we kind of need to, you know, consider there are people in the industry still who actually were trained with in terms of objectivity. I have no idea what the training centers are doing now. Are they still accuracy and objectivity? Because it's important. And then the other side of the coin is engagement, to a certain extent, is about making money, because media organizations also have to fund themselves. So in terms of it's also a revenue driver. If you don't engage with your audience, then you really have nothing. You're going to be reporting on things that are unimportant to them and so on. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Juanita. I mean, you mentioned objectivity and how journalists in the past were told to be objective when reporting on stories. And engaged journalism encouraged journalists to work with the community. So how do you bring the two concepts together to actually bring objective by being an objective as a journalist, but also creating
Now, ways it's as open to the person as you can be. I think the you know, one of the discussions that I've had is that you need to meet the people where they are. I think that's quite a catchphrase as well now. Don't go into a story saying, okay, this is what I want as an outcome, because this will make a good story. I mean, I don't think you can do that. I think what you need to do is go into it, find out whether you have a preconceived notion. You know, if it follows the traditional line, your editor tells you to go out and cover a story. If and you're gonna, this is the title, you know, there are no toilets in a certain community. You want to go there and you don't want to ask questions that are going to be leading them into a certain angle. I mean, I think that it all ties into, like, you know, telling the truth, being accurate, but also telling their truth, which is probably the most important part.
Thank you, Juanita. Fiona, engaged journalism aims to close the gap between communities and the journalists who aim to serve them. How can journalists achieve this?
I would say that Juanita has said a lot on this, and I completely agree with you, Juanita. In addition to what you've said, I think this gap can also be achieved. It can also be reduced by creating a synergy between journalists and the community. Of course, this isn't just as easy as doing it in one day and everything. And I think this synergy it has to go through different methods unique to every community, just in order for them to achieve effective partnership and collaboration. So I would say a few suggestions I would share is that for journalists who aren't doing this already, to go back to the drawing board, think differently about story selection, framing, and distribution of content in the time that we are now. And I think there's also a need for us to think about serving those who may not already be consuming our journalism, and also how best to reach out to them. And I would say lastly, it's very crucial for journalists, and as they select and frame content, to always involve community members. I think that's the key point, where Juanita said, follow them where they go. So.
And Juanita, as All Africa, you guys work remotely. So how is it that you guys actually engage with communities? You obviously mentioned going into the communities. So how often do your journalists do it? Do they do it for specific stories? How does it necessarily work at All Africa?
Well, we do it for specific stories. We don't have reporters all over the continent. We have freelancers, of course, that work for us. If we deem something that important enough, we'll actually have the person go out there. So we have staff in South Africa. We have Cape Town, Joburg, and then specifically we have some freelancers in Kenya. So if we find an issue, and we find that so part of the model of All Africa is that we collaborate across our borders. So if there's an important issue in Kenya, the flooding, it's not just a Kenyan issue. It's a Uganda issue. It's a Tanzanian issue. It's also a South African issue. It's an issue all around the continent. And then, of course, we can link it to the climate crisis. So we would need somebody to actually be there. And the way we get around it is, I can go back to one of the stories we did. We actually had to ask, even though we had someone in Kenya, we had to ask one of the farmers that we spoke with to go around the farm and record some video for us, because that's the only way we could get footage. I mean, we use technology that we have. I mean, WhatsApp has been really amazing. Social media has been amazing. It's been a boon and an absolute horror. But yeah, besides that, it's been really great to have technology to actually connect people. I would say with great difficulty, that's how we do it. Even with technology there, we have people, Anna person from Kenya, one of the indigenous peoples. And it's been really hard to get hold of him. He's an elder in one of the councils. And because the technology is not familiar with him, I spent probably 10 minutes just introducing myself and saying what we would like. And it's not always the technology is there and then everything works out. There's still the language barrier and a whole bunch of things that separate us from the topics that we would like to cover. But we use what we have.
I think that's a very interesting point, Vanessa, that you mentioned about how you actually asked a farmer to record for you guys, because I think that also involves the process of actually having community members in the journalism process. And Fiona, I'd be interested to you. Do you think like more of that's going to happen in community members and journalists in creating stories?
Sorry, Lwazi, I missed. For just repeat the question, please.
Oh, sure, no problem. Obviously, Juanita mentioned that they wrote an article about a farmer in an area, and they actually asked the farmer to record for them. So I'm interested to know that, do you think more of that collaboration between
environment has evolved in a way where journalism is not the way it used to be before, and I don't think it can survive the way it used to be before. I loved what Juanita mentioned about climate change. It's been such a struggle. And I don't know if you remember, Lwazi, when we first met at the conference, climate was such an issue where journalists are reporting about this. And as times are changing and as news consumption is also evolving, I would say the same has to be said about journalism. Not many are having the skill to take on this kind of task and explain to the audience that is experiencing this challenge what's happening, sharing information on what to do about this change. So I think it's also important in relation to journalists rebuilding the trust with the society. It's important for them to also pursue trainings and workshops that would help them also convey such information to the audience in a way that would be easily digested. And I think slowly but surely would be rebuilt. Of course, it would have to take place systematically. However, a good start also for journalists to be able to show that their audience that we are talking about things that are happening to you.
Our audience, and I want to do that with audience because when we go out and we cover stories, we go into a community that already has established roles and values and all of those things, and they might not understand what climate change or the climate crisis or the climate emergency. We've chosen to call it a crisis or emergency because the change is obvious. It's just gotten to the point where it is a crisis. So when we go into that, the people that are living in that community, they are the experts. They might not know what the climate crisis is, but their lives are affected every single day by the place where journalists are the experts. They, you know everything about the topic that you've been on the beat for 10, 15 years, all of those things. We are not in that more. I mean, probably about 10 years ago, there was a long discussions about the juniorification of newsrooms, that junior people are running the newsrooms now, and they don't have the 10 years of experience of being an editor, and they don't necessarily have the skills. To a certain extent, that's not so bad, because it does take this inborn thought of journalists have to be a certain way. Like when you go into a climate crisis story, you don't need to know what climate crisis is. You just need to know that that community is going through a really hard time because there's flooding and there's so many. Everything's a climate story as far as I'm concerned. We could talk about anything and it can lead back to governance, it could lead back to climate crisis, it could lead back to health, it could lead. So everything's interconnected, and I think we just have to remember I think Lwazi, we are. Oh,
Sorry, the internet, I apologize. It's a bit unstable. So sometimes I freeze a bit, but I am back. I do apologize for that. Thank you for that, Juanita. But I actually just want to ask you, you obviously mentioned how there has been when journalists approach them when they come and report on stories. So how can I think both Fiona and Juanita can answer this. How can journalists approach that will allow them to be open and talk to them?
Okay. I think I needed to repeat the question because there were holes in there. So how could journalists, what exactly about the approach
Yes, in terms of their
would need to
approach.
change for journalists? Oh gosh. Okay. So unfortunately, we live in a time of personality leadership, of people who have certain kinds of personality of media, and I think that it's really difficult to navigate because people that are popular will see themselves as experts. So reluctant to say, but it does involve. So this is you're to going in community. You can't go thinking that I'm just going to ask the questions. I need to get back to my news editor, and they want the story by 3 o'clock, and this is those people balancing. And the breaking news stories, they are gone. They've been gone for a long time. You need to have some sort of like you need to find people again. So you need to play both sides of the street, and that's not way they satisfy everybody. It is by what
Agree with everything. There's nothing else.
uh, I wonder if we put our video.
Okay, I'm back. I'm so sorry about the
It's okay.
we don't
Don't none of us
everyone,
do.
including
We just
I think to please
Or with the
sorry, let me myself back on. Could you explain what kind of changes you mean? Because there was quite a bit lost in the connection.
start. In terms of what are some of the changes that you guys have witnessed in your own newsroom or publication, and how have you responded to the changes? Can be about social media and how social media has changed the way in which content has produced and the way that content has been consumed by audiences. So maybe it could be just general changes, or it could be specific.
Yeah. So in terms of changes in the way we've been reporting, we've for the past couple of years, past 2 years, but before the past 2 years, we were chasing social media. they all have their own algorithms and they all have their own rules once again, and we come in and we play by their rules. We can't institute rules of our own. It is not a good playground. It's not an equal playground. Social media has changed the media landscape so dramatically, and I don't know that it's for the better. I think that, you know, when you get that message, when you get that feedback from somebody who read the story, or like the feedback we got, which was the farmer that I spoke about earlier, she actually had more say. I think to a certain extent has skewed how we approach stories as well. Like sensationalism wins. There are people with millions and millions and millions of followers, and the engagement is amazing, but what contribution are they making? And I'm not throwing shade at anybody. I'm sorry if it sounds like it, but you know, it's just I think it's about, we talk about impact, and because we have a very or Africa has a sustainable development approach when it comes to covering stories. I try not to post stories about the reading level being for grade 4s in South Africa being they cannot read with meaning. I don't want to focus on that. I want to focus on, so are there organizations that have made it, you know, have made a difference in this particular group? Is there work that's going on to change that situation? I mean, that's what we want, you know, the idea is very useful in staying in touch with people who are on social media. I think the need for social media engagement and the drive for it is for numbers and once again stats, and I can't support that because it's not a direct indication of what the media organization is doing. You can't, there's no points when you go to the person and you go to the happening there. So I think our audience, which is the, you know, the social media people, yeah, they're a really big part of our audience, but it's just being able to measure that makes certain people happy in the industry. Just the fact that they are numbers. There's so much about journalism that you can't measure, and that's the challenge, is that we have to balance that business side of things, and we have to balance we have to hold the ideals and the ethics and what we want to do with our journalism. We have to hold that higher than the revenue, which is ridiculously, I mean, like, it's impossible. Sorry, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's only possible because of funding, because of people who give, and I think that goes back to the owner, because of people who feel so strongly about those topics that they're willing to fund those kinds of things. And so that's where, like, funded journalism comes in. But your ideals and the ideals of the funder, it needs to meet. It can't be, there can't be any difference between how you feel about things. And of course, there's the thing about control when it comes to funding, but I've gone into another topic now. And I mean, yeah.
Thank you, Juanita. Fiona, I'd actually like for you, would you want to comment on the social media aspect? Because I know you work in that industry. Is there anything like you would like to say in response to Juanita?
Yeah, I would love to say. I think Juanita's concerns are very, they can't be ignored for sure. I come with a different perspective that journalism is evolving. We're all aware of this, and that it's reached a point where we can't avoid saying that we have to move to the digital space. And I see the positive of this. As I said, I'm a very optimistic person, but I see the positive of this where, as you mentioned, Juanita, there's a challenge to engage with the audience physically. So digital platforms to some extent have supported community-centered journalism, and there is negativity to it, I won't deny, but it gives this platform gives the opportunity for journalists to engage with their community when it comes to stories. Does depend on what our target is when we are reaching our audience online. Perhaps it's just to reach our digital audience. Perhaps it's also for us to measure our content and see how best it is. Maybe it's our only way for us to measure our engagement. In other aspects, some organizations depends on how a media or journalist organization has fashioned itself. There is no one fits all, of course, but I think, yeah, going back to the drawing board and determining who do we want to reach or how do we want to reach them is very important for us to know whether we do want to take space in social media or not. I also do want to touch on the funding aspect. And I think it's so true how funding is really supported by maybe someone saying, I want you to share this information, and they would only fund you because they want you to share specific information. At GFMD, we've experienced this challenge with our members where they only have to end up sharing some information or doing a certain project just because a donor wants to reach their own target. And we're trying to bridge that gap where we're engaging with donors as well. We have this initiative called Impact Initiative, where we're trying to bridge the gap between donors and whoever they fund. And we tell the donors, listen, these people are saying whatever you're asking us to do is not fitting our society. Is there any way that we can work on this, as opposed to just accepting funding? And I think this has also changed how we're receiving funding in the continent, because I feel like there is not much, I know funding has changed drastically since COVID-19. And I think we also have to find a way. And this is a challenge, of course, because a small organization can't go to UN and say, I'm experiencing this challenge and you should listen to me. But this is how we're trying our best to rally with the news and media outlets and journalists to tell them, can you share with us what challenges you're experiencing with funding? Tell us what you would want the donor to hear from you, and we convey that information. And I think that relationship is also one to consider. But as you said, it's a whole different conversation. So openly invite anyone to reach out to me if they have specific issues they would love to share to donors, and we would be happy to promote more advocacy on that.
Fiona, for the one to get into feel comfortable, could you maybe share your contact details either in the Q&A or chat box so people are able to contact you? And Fiona, this question is for you. What are some of the methods or tools that journalists can use to get the attention of news consumers?
Sorry, could you repeat the question? I didn't hear so well, sorry.
No problem. So what are some of the methods or tools that journalists can use to get the attention of news consumers?
Okay, so some of the tools I would say, and this is coming from my previous work experience, is that you reach out to your audience to share generally. So I will give the situation where we were talking a lot about sexual and reproductive health rights. That was our topic, and we relied heavily on social media. One of the tools we used was polls to be able to listen to our audience. And it would be a very simple and informal poll just to see where our audience is at with a specific where they are in terms of how much knowledge do they know about a certain thing. And once we did that, we converted some of these lack of knowledge, these gaps, into articles, which we would share online, or we would even paint to be able to sensitize our audience. And one way we wanted to also know if they are listening to us, in addition to generic ways of seeing how social media engagement tools, such as, checking whether they're likes or shares, is also seeing whether our relationship with our audience changed. So we were very keen on monitoring our inboxes and our emails, just to see and measure how many from our audience reached out to us. And this targeted tool, if I could put it that way, helped us be able to know, is our audience growing? What is our audience demographic? Is that changing? And even looking through these analytics also helped us know how best to shape the content that we have to be able to reach those who may not already consume our content, but making sure that we reach out to them and they get to receive that information. And we also tried to promote transparency, where we were open with how our audience would reach out to us. So we were always open, saying, could you reach out to us? I know it's not easy to build that level of trust, but like I said, it does take time, where we asked them to reach out to us, and slowly, based on also what we were sharing that was helping them, they would reach out to us, give us testimonials, which was very good for us. And we also made sure we were transparent in our work, in that when we reached out through polls, we showed them how we're using this information to influence policy making in the continent. So we were very transparent with the process, and I would say that those were some of the ways we did previously when I was working somewhere else.
Thank you, Fiona. So Juanita and Fiona, this question is for both of you. One of the main focuses on engaged journalism is the relationship between journalists and communities. However, trust in the media has dramatically declined over the years. How can journalists rebuild that trust? Or, can journalists rebuild that trust? Is it possible?
Can I let you go first, Juanita?
Okay, sure. That's a hard one. Thanks, Fiona. Gosh, is it possible? I mean, I want to say yes, because I think I'm catching some of Fiona's optimism here. Because we've had it before, and I mean, when I say we, I mean journalists and people, report on events. I think the challenge really is journalists themselves, and the systems. I mean, everything plays a part in how trustworthy people find journalism. I think the major obstacle we have now is disinformation, misinformation, and what some people call fake news. And of course, it's a huge issue. It points towards need more trustworthy media organizations in the world. What it's also pointing to is they won't chance because they have information that has reinforced their beliefs already. So it's really difficult to come in and try and change someone's mind when they've already, decided on something. As much as it is an issue of being perceived as being untrustworthy, and some of them have proven themselves to be untrustworthy. I mean, everybody has an agenda. That's the other thing. The objectivity, I think the reason that it was focused on so much when I was studying is because it meant that the journalist felt nothing for the information that was in the story, so they could just present the information. But that's impossible. I mean, I think I realized that early in my career that objectivity is not something that I have. And then I realized, oh, wait, if human people, which is what journalists are made of, have objectivity generally because they are human, then why are we saying that this is one of the things that we have to hold on to? And so showing, and it's a societal issue. Gosh, I'm going to get deep. It's a societal issue. We want to be accurate, but we also want the information to be to 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 agree with us, essentially. I mean, I think everybody loves that, when a story comes out and you go, I told vaccine is going to give us 5G. Um, People they want their own beliefs to be reinforced by what the information that they receive, and that's not possible when it comes to journalism. Not always. We have to seek the truth. And the basic truth, not the this is my truth and this is your truth sort of concept abstract. We have to find out what was said in that meeting. If that person did what they did, are there other people that saw that happen? It's about the facts as much as about anything. Yeah, and of course the societal sort of the nature of people is that they don't necessarily want the facts, and it's the facts they don't want to know. This might be controversial. They don't want to know that they have to go for vaccines, even though we've been going for vaccines since way before I was born. My mother got a vaccine, probably like one of the first people. But it's been going on for like years, for decades, for such a long time. But people are still like, oh, there might be something wrong with this one. I tremble. That might be the reason that people don't understand vaccines, is because they won't explain how vaccines work when they got their vaccine, how it's supposed to work. So now there's questions around vaccination because people just don't understand the science behind it. So information is like, it's a double-edged sword. I'm going to stop there.
Thanks, Juanita. Fiona?
Yeah, so I would say one of the things I can, and again, back what content creators are doing. I'm not saying that relying on them because again, some believe the creators of fake news, but seeing how they build their communities, I think journalists can learn a lot from what they're doing. And I remember Juanita mentioning transferring expertise hats to some of the people you're working with on the ground to receive information. I think there is to some extent a level of humility that would be needed to sit down and say, what are these content creators doing? For example, just to build that community, not to feed into what they already are doing, but what can we adapt from them? And the challenge of objectivity comes along where is a journalist willing to change or willing to understand the changes that need to come along with their journalism in order to be able to engage with their audience. In line with what I'm saying about social media and feeding off from content creators, I would say one of the good things that would help is working also with these digital platforms, or to some extent involving journalists in advocacy and policy efforts with digital platforms, where there could be a synergy whereby, for example, working with Meta to verify All Africa's Facebook page, so that it also provides a source of credibility where someone who is receiving information, knowing that I would say a big percentage of people rely heavily on social media to get information, where if I would see All Africa helping these platforms with reducing misinformation and fake news. There's a lot of collaboration that needs to be done also to promote journalism in the digital space. But I will say that it's not impossible to build that trust, but it would take.
Thank you. Thank you, Fiona, for that. I would like to ask you both. Obviously, Fiona, you mentioned that there needs to be a willingness on journalists' part to kind of change and move with the current times. Do you think that journalists are willing to change? I'd also pose the question to you, Juanita. Obviously, there were specific ways that journalists did things, and there were specific structures that they followed and rules. Like, do you think there's a willingness for journalists to change? Do you think that there's a willingness for newsrooms to adapt the way that they've been worked in the past and adapt to the current changes?
Yeah, I don't think there's a choice, really. I do agree with what Fiona has been saying, she said it several times, is that there's no choice. We are living was kind of the beginning of the industry in South Africa. And there were people in the newsroom where I was working who didn't want us to have simple things like I couldn't call myself an editor. I had to call myself, and that was quite obvious. It was a threat, I think, is what they were thinking. But I think the threat was not necessarily, I mean, to use that word, was the fact that they were not moving on with the times, and that's the threat that we have right now as well. If we don't move with the times, we won't exist in 5 years' time. It's as simple as that.
Thank you, Juanita. Fiona, sorry. Fiona, you can.
Okay. Well, I would say I agree with Juanita 100%. And I think for those who do not want to change, for sure they would end up, unfortunately, to some extent, irrelevant, and we don't want that happening. I'm also want to put a disclaimer that I'm not speaking from a journalist's background, but I would also like to share my observation that if this change doesn't happen, we're having a new wave of news and media that is great, but it's also missing that old school aspect, which is also important in the media. So that's why I emphasize that it's so important for this change to happen. Otherwise, news will become something us old school will not remember.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm calling myself old school. I shudder. I think that I think the last time the changes came, and the changes come, like, I don't know, it feels like every single day. Things are moving so fast. When the changes came the first time around, and people were starting to move online, and there were journalists who said, nope, not doing it, not doing it. And I just want to say those journalists are not irrelevant. And I mean, I agree with you, Fiona, that there's a place for them. And I must say that, unfortunately, it's made that some journalists, we've lost their skills. We've lost their skills to other industries. The people that have had 40, 50 years of experience, honestly, I don't want to lose people like that. People that have, like they've been working since they were 20 years old, and now they, I don't know, 60, 70 something, but they still have contributions. And I think that listening to our elders when it comes to journalists would be a good thing. We do need to. And listening to the previous generation and the next generation, that's what you want to incorporate in your training, is you want to be able to have a person who has respect for what's come before, and the ethics of journalism, where you go, okay, well, this has to be true. I'm not going to set up an interview, and I'm not going to plagiarize. I'm not going to take a paragraph from this story and put it in my story. It's the basics, like tell the truth, like, be factual about what you present in the story. That's it's key to journalism. And then of course there's the new generation where it's the presentation of the news, of the information, of whatever it is that you want to share, and understanding TikTok. Because I confess I do not have an account. I kind of use someone else's, but I mean it's embracing all of the technology and understanding all of those things that come our way. Like I say, use what you have. If you have a TikTok account for you, make sure that you can present it. Find out why, like Fiona said, find out why this influencer is so popular. What are they doing? Hopefully not sharing like really sensationalist untruths, but the method that they are using. I think that's also really important.
Thank you, Fiona and Juanita. I do have a question here from an attendee, Yana Boshov. I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. This was one's for engagement. Have you found that social media analytics, especially Facebook, have become increasingly inaccurate? For example, the stats provided by Facebook do not correlate with other analytical engines' data, and more content that appear on your timeline are missing from Meta Business Insights, making me doubt the accuracy of data like total reach or engagement, especially for specific data. Question, you found that and increasingly inaccurate.
Thank you, Jan, for your question. I would say there was, to some extent, a level of inaccuracy happening. We'd never relied only on Facebook analytics. We relied also on Google Analytics. And before we came to the conclusion of this is our audience, we really had to do a lot of research trying to figure out, is this the same, portraying the same thing that we're seeing online? So I'll give the example on Facebook. We had a majority of male audiences as opposed to women audience. However, on Google Analytics, the information we were sharing targeting the female audience was the one that was mostly viewed. So we were trying to figure out how this happened. And we did reach out. Again, as I said, a lot of collaboration is involved. We had to reach out to Facebook and say, listen, these are the things we're experiencing. The algorithm was messing up our work extremely, because something as simple as showing a pregnant belly was banned content would flag our work. So it challenged audience would see us and they say, okay, Love Matters Africa is producing the right thing. The statistics, however, I would say over the time, from once we started relying on Facebook data, over the time did change. And that's when we realized that we have to have a backup analytics to be able to review our content. So I would say to some extent, we never relied fully on Facebook, because it also kept on changing, and also the algorithm limited our reach and our audience. So we also had to find other ways around it, including advocacy work with Facebook at that time. I hope this answers your question.
Thank you, Fiona. As we head towards the last 15 minutes of the webinar, I do encourage the other attendees to ask questions on the Q&A. We would appreciate, and we would love for this conversation to continue to be an interactive conversation. But I think I'd like to ask both of you, what are the next steps that journalists and newsrooms need to take to produce and publish content that are more engaging entities?
Fiona, you should go first, please.
Thank you for being so kind, Juanita. I appreciate. So I would say, again, maybe I might sound like a broken record, but I think as journalism is evolving to the digital space, there's a lot to consider about how to approach this. Because again, we have this limitation where we're working, covering a whole continent or having a global audience, yet we are unable to reach to them. It's so important that this engagement with communities continues. We also have to have that credibility in that digital space to be able to be more effective in our work. So I would say that would be one of the next steps. I think that the journalists who are also hard on not going towards the digital space need to be willing, if I could put it this way, to trainings, to simple discussions around what journalism in the digital would look like for them. I don't think it's this is now what's happening. You either do it or die, but it could be in a way where, again, collaboration happens, where the journalists who were scared or not willing to move to the digital space can find a way to contribute and also receive some level of engagement with their communities without them even having to be there. They could work who already are specialized in the digital space, just to make sure that that engagement with the community continues both online and offline. That's what I would say.
I'd like to add that what I've discovered works when it comes to encouraging is what Bumu present in the report, telling someone's story, is to start with their own community. So whether that they'll love this. So one of my editorial team is a gamer, and that's his game. The one thing we did is teach people to write about their communities, so that when they want an example of engaged journalism and something that they kind of feel passionate about, they have their own writing as an example. So I would say find out what your people are interested in. I found out the other day that another one of my editorial team is into basketball. I have no idea. So I mean, and we know that Africa's basketball players are just all over the NBA. So it brings you content that's exciting, and it gets the people that are writing excited about what they're writing. So the person that wrote the basketball usually writes about climate. He writes about politics. He writes about a range of things. But now he's on a series of basketball articles, profiles of African basketball players, which is, I mean, it's so newsworthy. It's going to bring us readers. It's going to reflect well on our profile as All Africa, but it's also going to make this person who's writing it really happy, because he gets to share what he does every single weekend, if not every single night, while the season is on. And yeah, so I think that that's the first step. Get journalists to tell you who their community is, their community, get them to write about it, and you find out what touches them.
Thank you, Fiona and Juanita, for your insights. I do have a question here from Andrea van Veek. The question is, what is your opinion on AI tools such as ChatGPT? Where do we draw the lines regarding the use of these tools in newsrooms?
Sure. Okay, so wow. I don't know. This is not an easy one to answer. I don't want my staff to type their thoughts into ChatGPT. I mean, I've used it a couple of times. You put the information in, and it sends you something back that isn't necessarily, like, it doesn't actually give you any answers. Like if you tell it to, it's not going to do something from scratch. It's only using what it has. So it's not going to turn someone who's a bad researcher, bad interviewer, bad information gatherer. It's not going to change that person into an amazing journalist. The information that you put in is what you get out. So I don't think it's a threat as such to journalism. I think it's one of those technologies that we have to learn to use and we have to embrace. Like I said earlier, honestly, we have no choice. If I have a French reporter who gathers information, I'm just trying to think of a use for AI. A French reporter who gathers information in French, translates it into English, and then we can use AI to write an English article from that French, you know what I'm saying? Not a translation, but something original, then why shouldn't we be able to do that? It's about the information that you put in. If you're going to put in nothing, you're going to get nothing out. If you're going to put in, if you're not going to put in the facts, you're going to, it's about what you put in the content. It's not about like, oh, AI is magically going to take over our jobs by asking all the questions, constructing the angle, all of those things. I don't think that's something that's going to happen soon. I mean, lots of people have conspiracy theories or just, knowing what's happening with technology and how fast it's moving is that I think it's comparable to the monkey that sits there and types and he will eventually type out Shakespeare's works. I think we're at that stage with AI and we'll see what comes and then we'll have to deal with whatever comes our way. Because I don't want to predict anything because I could not have predicted that we would have this huge explosion of AI and people would be so obsessed with it. So, yeah.
I would say this, sometimes progress is knowing when to hit pause. I think it's important to figure out with the much transfer, how much journalism is transferring to the digital space. I think there should be an evaluation of, has journalism caught up? Is it still going to learn as more of these tools keep on coming up? When I think of ChatGPT, I personally have a bittersweet relationship to it in that I'm always scared to talk about it because there are people who have like strong opinions towards it. But I think when it comes to media, and I would say media development, is how is it being received? It's coming in fast, but have we reached towards its level? I think there's a lot in the digital space that journalism has to learn with this evolution. And I think that progress, such as ChatGPT, there's some things to it that probably need to pause for us to properly understand, as opposed to just receiving it all at once just because it's amazing, of which, yeah, it's really good. I'll give an example of climate change reporting. So we see reporting on climate change requires journalists to learn about scientific facts and concepts, and be able to communicate them clearly and effectively and in a simple way in which the audience would be able to understand. And to be able to facilitate this process, journalists are inclined to use artificial intelligence, as Juanita mentioned. So it helps generate text based on information available. The only problem now, then maybe it's not considered with the use of ChatGPT when it comes to reporting, is while it's useful, it can promote mis and disinformation in this way. So sometimes it writes plausible sounding content, but sometimes like you would read it and you're like, okay, this isn't correct. This does not make any sense at all. So it could sound smart, but is it a fact? So while we're trying in the media space to prevent false information, misinformation, disinformation, while we're trying to prevent that in the space, so it undermines efforts to address some of the information we're trying to relay, such as climate change. You could be sharing something about the climate crisis, and you've used ChatGPT to prepare something and share something, but we're missing out the small aspects that there's a tiny bit of false information planted in there that could really undermine the entire work that we're doing. So that's what I would say about ChatGPT.
So progress is knowing when to pause. Thank you, Fiona, for that. Thank you both for your insight. As we head towards the end of our webinar, I just have one last question for you both. How can publications track engagement?
Wow. So of course, using the tools that we already have at our disposal, but I really think that the way you track engagement is by people coming to you with their stories. That it's not about, and I insist it's not about the numbers, and I know that that's probably not a very popular, but it's what you can get from the numbers. And I think also Fiona said something similar earlier, is it's about the impact that you're having. It's not about the numbers necessarily. It's not about like how many hits you got on it, or it's about someone coming to you and saying, I saw this story and I have the same problem, or would you be able to help us with promoting this? And all Africa, we get those kind of emails all the time. So I feel secure in knowing that even if our engagement levels are not high, that that people come to All Africa because they want their stories told. They ask us to do it for them, so that the African continent and the world can see it. So I think it's a kind of lost measurement that we don't speak about enough. Yeah.
And I've said this so many times, I couldn't agree more with Juanita, whereby really is the audience coming to you and confiding in you, in that they tell their story. It helps you track engagement in that you're also finding out where your story is reaching out to. Because, for example, it could be an old person from a whole different town, and you're like, wow, I didn't know that people from this country are actually listening to my story, or I didn't know that our information on climate change or investigative journalism is actually taken in this part of the country. So I think, as she said, that also reaching out to you is a very important way to the generic aspects of numbers, such as likes, shares, seeing how our audience is engaging with our content online. But I think that the audience trusting and confiding in you really is one of the best ways of tracking your engagement and your impact in what you're sharing.
I thank you today, and this brings us to the end of our webinar. Thank you for sharing your insights that have been truly valuable, and we hope that the attendees that have been on this webinar, that there's some things that they can take and actually put into their own work and their skills in their newsrooms. And I'd like to encourage the attendees to please feel free to drop me any ideas on what topics we can discuss and explore. Now, I'd like to acknowledge the support of our funders and partners, the Swedish International Development Agency, SIDA, through the CHARM project for their generous support, Open Society Foundation's program on independent journalism, and the Wits Center for Journalism. Please continue to keep in touch and engage with us on social media. Our Facebook page is Jamlab Africa. Our Twitter handle is @Jamlab Africa, and our Instagram is just Jamlab Africa, or drop us an email at info@jamlab.africa. Thank you both for actually being part of this webinar. We do appreciate you taking the time and for sharing your insights. And thank you to the attendees as well.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. It's been fun.
Thank you as well.
Bye.
Bye.
Questions.
And hear your audio.
Okay, so I am going to get started. Thank you so much to the attendees